So apparently, Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth didn't quite meet Square Enix's expectations. And unlike a whole bunch of online players, especially in Call of Duty, I don't have to cheat for recreation. There's defense mode, switching to attack mode, and I think the expectation is too high. Almost like an American female in 2024, the expectations is way too damn high. I mean, like what did they expect? First of all, Final Fantasy VII Remake, despite being the first Final Fantasy VII game, original Final Fantasy VII game in years, and a remake that everybody been clamoring for years, but Final Fantasy VII Remake was on the PS4. The second best-selling PlayStation console of all time, right behind the PS2. Among one of the best-selling consoles of all time, the PS4. The PlayStation 5 does not have a strong install base as the PlayStation 4, obviously. Well, PlayStation 4 is past 100 million copies. PlayStation 5 has half of that. We're halfway in the generation. The 7 remake came out towards the end of the PS4 generation, where everyone and their moms has a PS4. Stronger install base. The PS5 has sold half so far. You're halfway in. And this is also the second game. So you also got to put into the fact that like the whole install base about the remake on the PS4, there's a good number of them that probably didn't beat the game. Now, I'm not one of those people. I've beaten Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I only did that because the pandemic happened, and I had a whole bunch of free time on my hands, and I went ahead and beat them, made sure I beat it. But there's a lot of people that haven't beat it yet. And those people, there's probably a lot of people that want Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but they haven't beaten the remake yet, so they're going to wait until they beat the remake before they go to the Rebirth. Another thing you have to put into account, the PC masturbate race. A lot of people complain about the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth being blurry on the PS5 and having some kind of like minor glitches, like not exactly playing perfectly smooth as a baby ass smooth on the PS5. And a lot of people did play Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PC gamers that loved it. So you got to take that into account. There's a lot of people that wanna play it on the PC, that they're literally waiting for the time exclusivity of the PS5 to end so they can come on the PC and then they'll buy it. A lot of people did that with the remake. Remember, the remake had to be re-released 1,000 times on every console in the Galaxy, on PC and everything, until finally, it sold, that amount. I think before all those re-releases and all that stuff, it probably sold close to what the Rebirth was selling right now. Maybe a little bit more, because it's on the PS4, a bigger install base. But you got to take that into account. We're still in the time exclusivity era. But the time exclusivity part of the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We're still in that time frame. We haven't extended it out past the PS5 yet. I guarantee you will start selling more after that. If it already sold half of what the remake did, that's actually pretty good. With the much smaller install base of the PS5, there's a lot of people that still own the PS4 that haven't bought the PS5. I know a lot of gamers that have the PS4 that don't have a PS5. I do. Only the real like hardcore MFers like me and like a few friends that don't have the PS5 and Switch is another thing. But like a lot of people haven't bought the PS5 yet. They're probably never going to. They're probably going to wait to the PS6 at this point. Some people are waiting for, I think now, since we don't really have that big generational gap in graphics anymore between consoles, like that era is over. The last time we had that was probably during the 64 to GameCube, PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2. No, the PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 era, For Nintendo, it stopped at the GameCube. But for PlayStation, I think it stopped around the PS3. And Xbox, same thing. It stopped around the 360, whatever. But yeah, those big generational leaps are now done. People are now buying consoles like they buy phones every other year. Not every other year, but every other, like for phones, is every other phone, right? Every other year, because it comes out every year. But for consoles, it'll probably be like every other console generation now. Like people that have a PS4, most definitely by the time the PS6 rolls around, will definitely be purchasing that. And the PlayStation 6 might be the one that sells more, especially if the PS5 are just not having enough games coming out. just because games are just taking longer to make now, and games are just taking forever. And so this generation's really feeling that effect, mostly the PS5. Remember, Nintendo went through the whole Wii U period of having no games at all, and they pretty much just freaking stockpiled all the games for the Switch. And when the Switch came out, that's why the Switch had so many games and was able to do well. Sony had so many games come over the PS4, even towards the end of its life cycle. By the time the PS5 rolled around, they didn't really have shit. And now they're just starting to get games. Like, a lot of games have been rolling out. But, like, maybe when Grand Theft Auto 6, that's when things will change. Like, it's going to take probably getting towards the end of this generation. Remember, the PS3, it took towards, like, the end of its generation to really start selling hot. And not like the PS5 has sold badly. It's just people complaining about lack of games. But, like, I think by the time we get closer to the end of this generation, that's when the PS5 finally hit its stride. It'll hit its stride by that point. And a lot of people are going to wait for the PS6 to come out. People that have the PS4, by the time PS6 rolls around 2028, most people PS4s have to have been close to death by that point. They'll probably start closing down the PS4 servers. You think so? Yeah, they'll probably close the PS4. They probably purposefully close the PS4 servers by that point, just so that they could force people to go on the PS5, PS6 bandwagon. But the point is, you got to factor all that shit in about these sales. Because the fact that it sold half of that many copies already and it hasn't even been released outside the PS5 window yet, that's actually a good thing. I consider that success. I don't know what the hell was Square Enix, the expectations are too high. Like, what the hell were you expecting? So you wanted to sell the same copies that remake sold in lesser time and a lesser and an install base that's freaking smaller. Half of what the original one was. The remake was on a console that sold 100 million plus. This console's 50 million plus. You expected to sell just the same, if not more? Like, what the hell were you expecting? If only 7 million people bought the remake, what you think? 12 million were gonna buy the Rebirth? That never played the remake? I mean, what are you guys thinking? This is a sequel game after all. Whatever your first game sells, you gotta expect that the second one, if it's a follow-up and sequel to the first one, might sell half at first, and then eventually get to the point where it sells that many copies. And this is what happens when you make sequel games and shit. When you make sequel games and threequel games and all this stuff, this is what to be expected. The first game sets the standard, and then it goes from there. Like Spider-Man 2, the original Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire one. Spider-Man 2, as great as that is, and I thought it was better than the first one, the best one in the trilogy, it did a little bit less in the box office than the first one. You can't expect, Spider-Man 1 did 100 million in the box office, so Spider-Man 2 is going to do $1 billion. Nah, the second one did like another 7-something million, like a little below 800. If I have that correct, if I remember that correctly. But like, yeah, you should expect it to at least sell the same, if not, more. And it's not like they're not gonna make a Final Fantasy. They're not gonna finish off this trilogy with a third game. They are, because they're really at the ending of this year, they're already gonna start the voice acting for the third game. So the game's in the shelf. So it doesn't really matter what this sells. It's not like it sold. It's not like it sold freaking 1 million copies in 6 months or something. And now let's talk about Final Fantasy 16. That game sold 3 million in a week. It sold 3 million in less than a week, from what I remember hearing. And then I don't know what Square Enix is so ashamed that he sells, they won't even release them. Both these games sold millions of copies. How's your game gonna sell millions of copies and you're ashamed of it? This is the same crap I was talking about with Crash Bandicoot and Activision. The first game sold 20 million, and because Crash Bandicoot 4 only sold 5 million, they're like, Like 5 million is great for any fucking game to sell. And Final Fantasy actually has an excuse to be mad at 5 million. And if the sequel game doesn't sell as much as the first one, like exactly as much, if not more, they're fucking disappointed and folding their arms, like, this game just didn't meet our expectations. Like, they expected, because the first game sold 7 to 8 million, the second one has to sell 16 million. Like, what the hell? This is a freaking game, a sequel game after all. I mean, come on. Let's go back to 16. It has to have sold at least 7 to 8 million at this point. It sold, 4 million? If it sold 3 million in 3 days, that was last year? It has to. There's no way to only sold at least 5. Like that's putting it way too low. It has to have sold at least 7 million around there, close to 8 million. It has to be around that ballpark at this point. And you know what's funny? Boy, they released both these games not back to back, but pretty damn close to back to back, like the Drake song. They released it really close to each other. Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth came out within months of each other, from what I remember. I remember, wasn't it months? I remember 16 came out, and before I know it, you rolled around the corner, you went to work for a week, and then Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth just came out of nowhere. I know it wasn't that close, but it wasn't even a year. It's like what Pokemon did with Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. But at least they released Legends in the beginning of the year in January, and they released Scarlet and Violet towards the end of the year. With Final Fantasy with Rebirth and 16, I remember it was just a handful of months between each other. So they cannibalized each other. Remember, these are not two totally different. I guess that was 16 is completely different because it's not an action RPG. It's more of a hack and slash. So it's not going to take the install base of the other one. But it has the word Final Fantasy in it. And you can't, Pokemon got away with it because they're Pokemon. But like Final Fantasy thought they could do the same thing, and look how well it worked out for them. They even admitted it now, that they kind of cannibalized their own games by doing that shit. Remember, Pokemon, even though it's an RPG, is a relatively simple game. Final Fantasy games are much more longer and complicated than that. I haven't got the Final Fantasy games yet just because I went through my low period of video games and I just got back into it. I want to beat Dragon Ball Z Kakarot over the weekend, and then I'm going to go after God of War, and then I'm going to start tackling the Final Fantasy games. I'll buy 16 and 7 Rebirth. I'll probably play 16 first because the hack and slash should be a lot faster, and then I'll go to 7 Rebirth. But they released the games too closely between each other, and they said that what did they expect exactly? It wasn't two different install bases. If you play 16, chances are you play Rebirth. If you play Rebirth, chances you play 16. You're a Final Fantasy fan after all. And 15, despite how flawed that game was the best selling at 10 million. So I guess they're disappointed with 16 because it didn't sell 10 million. And disappointed at Rebirth because it didn't sell 7 to 8 million at like Remake did, even though it's still stuck within the time frame of the PS5 right now. It can't sell out of there yet. So I don't know what the hell they're expecting at this point. Their expectations, they need to lower the damn expectations and be happy with what their game sold, and just be happy with it. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And for the love of God, make Final Fantasy 17 an actual action RPG and not a freaking hack and slash. This is Attack. Most respect to the fence mode, and I'm out. Peace.